And then welcome to all the attendees as well. This is then a webinar that is hosted by the Norwegian Sports Law Association. My name is Ronny van der Meij and I'm a board member of the Sports Law Association. I will be the moderator of today's event. We have summoned a highly competent panel and have many interesting topics to cover, so I won't spend a lot of time on introductory remarks. I will just briefly take you to today's agenda and also introduce the panelists. Today's webinar has been named Mitigating the Covid-19 Virus Impact on Football. The webinar is divided in two parts. For the first part, we've been very lucky to have Professor Michele Colucci join us from Brussels. Professor Colucci is, in addition to being a leading academic in the field of international sports law, a member of the FIFA Dispute Resolution Chamber. Professor Colucci is also responsible for a series of publications on international sports law. One of these publications is the survey Coronavirus and its impact on football. This is an impressive comparative study based on reports from leading sports lawyers and academics in 52 jurisdictions. So in the first part of the webinar, Professor Colucci will take us through some of the key findings from topics of the survey related to 5 topics. The first is recommencement of football. That is something that has been heavily debated in the Norwegian media, ultimately. Secondly, we have impact on revenue, broadcasting rights, sponsorship, and ticket sales. We have employment status of players, which is also especially related to unilateral changes to players' contract, a topic that has been subject to a lot of debate in the Norwegian press. We have state aid and government measures, and also federation measures. When it comes to the second part of the webinar, a panel discussion will follow up on the topics from the presentation of Professor Colucci and focus particularly on topics of interest to the organization of football in Norway and Scandinavia. For this session, participants may submit questions in the chat window that may be addressed to Professor Colucci or the panel to the extent the time schedule of our participants allow. In addition to Professor Colucci and myself, the panel will consist of Mr. Inge André Olsen, that is probably known to most. He is currently a sporting director of Aalborg FC. We also have Mr. Espen Aubert, that is head of legal at the Norwegian Football Federation, and Mr. Erik Florian, that is a sports lawyer with more than 20 years of practice in the field of sports law and a partner at the law firm Stray. In addition to the topics Professor Colucci will cover in his presentation, the panel has also been invited to look ahead and share reflections on measures needed to ensure sustainability of organized football for the future. And with that introduction, I will now leave the screen to Professor Colucci that will take us through the first session. Michele, the screen is yours.
Good morning, och tack för the eagerly invitation. Buongiorno. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. I really appreciate that. In the beginning, some weeks ago, I had the similar presentation, and at this presentation, the title of Will Football Survive? As you can see from my first slide, I slightly changed the title. How will football survive the coronavirus? Because for sure, football is going to survive. We will see how, in which manner, what are the best practices, the best solutions that have been offered so far at a worldwide level, and what can we do as individuals, as sports lawyers, as athletes, as policymakers, to fight this challenge, but also to try to improve football and sport in general. The first outcomes, the outcome of our research is based on this survey that Ronnie already mentioned, covered 52 countries around the world, and was written by more than 65 authors, all leading and independent lawyers who help us in carrying out this analysis. You have to imagine that 2 months ago, or maybe 3 months ago, when the crisis was there, we were at the beginning of the crisis, we wanted to cover only 12 countries, and we had only 5 questions for the survey. At the end, these countries became 52, and we had nine countries. The countries covered are here in dark blue. You can easily spot them. And we try to cover all regions of the world, from Chile to Japan, from Norway to South Africa. And here there is a list, you find a list of the countries which have been analyzed so far. And while I say this, I already announced you a new version of this survey that is going to be published hopefully at the end of July or beginning of August. Just because we would like to keep track of what has been done in the last 3 months in all these countries. The analysis focuses on what is the actual status of the championships, professionals and amateurs championships. What have been the measures which have been taken at several levels? You will see it, you can read it, at government level, federation, league level. Then we try to analyze what is the status of players, football players in every country, and of course, what is the impact from a legal point of view that the coronavirus is having on these players. We did this exercise with regard to the employment agreements. We did it, of course, also with regard to the commercial agreements, like broadcasting and sponsorship. We try to see what is the role, what has been the role of players and sports association, what are the relevant national rules concerning insolvency, what has been the impact of the coronavirus on dispute resolutions from the substantial and from a procedural point of view. What has been done so far with regard to the return of the play, to the commencement of the championship. First of all, we analyzed, just because we were talking about football, about the top 5 leagues that are reported here. Now, everybody is aware that in France, the championship was cancelled, was among the first countries who declared their own championship, let's say, terminated, put it to an end, followed by the Netherlands. We also know now that Germany has been the first to have resumed its own championship. And then, of course, we know that in June also Spain, Italy, and England resumed the competition. Watch out. Don't take this statement for granted, because what is written here is clear to everybody now. It was not 2 weeks ago. As far as the government measures, so we have seen basically that all 5 governments, national governments, in general, have adopted unemployment schemes in favor of workers in general, and thus also in favor of players. What have been some peculiar measures that have been adopted in these leagues? I give you just the most significant ones. Then if you want to have fun, you have 353 pages of survey to discover by yourself what has been done in detail by all countries around the world. It was particularly interesting for me that the English Federation League, so this, not the Premier League, the second tier league, had already in place a relief fund, a fund dedicated to what clubs and players in order to, help them in conditions of difficulties, economic difficulties. Some other federations, like, first of all, the Dutch one, the German one, and the Italian one, also adopted some special line of credits with the banks in favor of their members. And then it was just last week or 2 weeks ago that, for instance, the Italian Federation put in place a special fund called Save Football, Salva Calcio, in favor of who? Not the clubs of Serie A, the first category, but rather to the clubs belonging to the lower championship, Serie B, Lega Pro, to the amateur players, 5 million in favor of the amateur players, and to the women football players. With regard to the revenues, I already mentioned that France has been the first country to have cancelled, to have brought to an end their own national championship. France, let's say the French Federation the French leagues were able to manage to have a payment plan with their TV broadcasters, at least for the games that they already played. In England, the approach was a little bit different in the sense that there was at the end an agreement with Sky to have a deferral, just a deferral in the payment. This is what has been done, some few examples from the top 5 federations in Europe. But also the players' associations try to play a role from an economic point of view. For instance, I found out, it was very interesting for me, to see that in England, they adopted a so-called hardship loan, which is specifically dedicated to the players in need. A similar fund exists, for instance, also in Italy. A fund for players who are in difficulties because their clubs went bankrupt or declared insolvent. And that, of course, can be used also for cases like the one at the stake, for exceptional circumstances like the coronavirus. We have seen that there have been a lot of negotiations, ongoing negotiations from players and clubs. Of course, first of all, at the national level. I have to say, unfortunately, some national trade union associations were not able to reach an agreement on a percentage, for instance, of the cutting of the salary for all players. Where the players' associations of the federation and the leagues failed at the central level, some clubs succeeded when they negotiated the salary cut, a reduction of this salary at club level. This has been, first of all, the case also of Juventus and Roma in Italy, Atletico Bilbao in Spain, Arsenal, Aston Villa in England, and Borussia Dortmund in Germany. I put at the end of this slide, if you notice, a nota bene. It was quite nice for me to discover that in the Bundesliga, the four clubs at the top of the table decided to give 20 million euros to clubs lower down the pyramid, lower down the table. A small but beautiful example of solidarity. What has been going on in the other 47 leagues? I tried to put all together in only one slide, but of course for the details I repeat, you have to go read the survey. This is the analysis up to the 5th of June, so almost 1 month ago. We are renewing the situation, but at that time, this was the scenario. You know, all over the world, all championships were suspended, except, and you see here from the names, in Argentina, Belgium, Cyprus, Kenya, Mexico, the Netherlands, and Scotland, where they were put to an end. Generally speaking, we can conclude that all governments around the world tried to fight this phenomenon. They put in place, although in a different manner, some measures to fight unemployment, or anyway to face the crisis that enterprises and workers in general were facing. Look at here, to the third frame. Out of 52 countries, we realize that only 3 of them, Japan, Holland, and Portugal, already had in place emergency funds. Funds already dedicated to face situations like, exceptional situations like, for instance, the one of a pandemic. We are facing now a pandemic. It could have been a war or something else. Anyway, they already had some emergency funds to be put in places. With regard to the negotiations from players and clubs, it seems that, of course, everywhere around the world, there were at least attempts to negotiate a reduction of the salary. What is interesting is that to note that this negotiation varied from a minimum to 10% to a maximum of 50%. There is one country where a club there to even not to negotiate, directly cut the salary to the 70%. And then I put it like in the last slide, the case of the Sapporo players. While all players and clubs around the world were trying to at least to negotiate and cut of the salary, the players of this club already received the money, the salaries concerning February and March, and you know what? They gave the money back to the club in order to help the management to survive the crisis. It is a question of culture. I say it all the time, in general, but specifically in football, culture matters. I'm not sure that in other parts of the world, being Italy or other countries, this would happen. What is the situation with regarding broadcasting and sponsorships? The main concern during the last months has been that, at least for professional football, the play of the game had to be guaranteed, not only for the sake of the sports event, but also to fulfill some obligations towards the broadcasting TV broadcasters and the sponsors. Why? Because the money comes from there. I repeat, this has been the main concern only for professional clubs. Watch out, professional clubs of the first category in every country. It seems that in many countries, you see Poland, Russia, Serbia, Slovenia, Switzerland, Argentina, and so on, the payment have been quite regular. Although in some of these countries, like Argentina, the championship came at the end, at the early stage. There are still ongoing negotiations between leagues and broadcasters in some of the countries that I listed here. In some others, there have been a deal has been reached with the mutual satisfaction, like in countries. The same scenario you could expect for the sponsorship agreements. But well, there you see, we know that in the countries listed, sponsors have already asked for a rebate or a halted of their payments. And this is interesting for the analysis, the conclusions, some of the conclusions that we are going to draw at the end of my presentation. Now, we asked to our colleagues around the world where there were already insolvency proceedings strictly related to the pandemic. We also realized that maybe it was too early to ask these questions, but we asked it, and it seems that up to the 5th of June, none of the club had opened an insolvency proceedings before because of the coronavirus. Nevertheless, the coronavirus has aggravated the situation of those clubs who were already in economic difficulties. And you will see, if you read the news, if you maybe as lawyers, you have already dealt with a transfer of players in China in the last year. I don't know how much money has been spent by Chinese club to get the superstars, European, international, Brazilian superstars. Well, it was quite astonishing to find out that 11 clubs from China, and we are not talking about small clubs, we're talking about very important clubs, are facing serious financial problems. It's very likely that they can go bankrupt. Then you see there are eight clubs in Colombia, and then we just reported on the news from the Spanish colleague that also in Spain there was the case of Malaga football club. This is a general overview of our survey with regard to the status of the championship, with regard to the measures that have been adopted by the relevant leagues or federation, players unions around the world. Now, I take this opportunity that this event has been organized by the National Association of Norwegian, by the Norwegian Association of Sports Lawyers, to dedicate maybe more time to one of the points that was on the schedule here, on the agenda. What has been the impact of the coronavirus on the status, I would say, on the employment relationship between a club and a player? We are all aware that FIFA issued the guidelines in April 2020. To give some instruction, some guidelines to whom? To everybody, to the members of the national members of FIFA, to the clubs, to the players' association, to the sports lawyers, of course. You have noticed that FIFA does not provide a definition of a situation linked to force majeure. It leaves it, to the national legal systems. Also here, it's also very interesting, of course, to note from the outset that we have to differentiate from legal system to legal system. I just reported the major categories, the civil law countries and the common law countries. In the civil law countries, of course, we talk about force majeure as the unforeseen circumstances that thus impedes the parties to fulfill their contractual obligation. Slightly different is the situation in the common law countries, where they do not speak in terms of force majeure. They rather speak in terms of frustrations. And I learned from my colleagues, common law countries colleagues, that it's quite difficult before a judge to advance a thesis of frustration, independent of the nature of the event. It is important to keep in mind that several times in these guidelines, FIFA says that it's not a part of the agreements, of the employment agreements between clubs and players. Before going further in this analysis, I want to draw your attention on a particular point that is, I think it's very interesting to note. I did not take part to the negotiations of these guidelines. Nevertheless, I was extremely happy when I learned that these guidelines were negotiated among stakeholders. They were not imposed by FIFA from the top to the bottom. They were concerted, negotiated together with the representatives of clubs, leagues, trade unions. And this is particularly important at international and regional and national level, of course. Why? Because if we want to give credibility, if you want to have a minimum hope of success of something, it's better to adopt a measure which is concerted, negotiated by the parties' representatives, rather than imposed on them. These guidelines tackle three kinds of agreements. I try to put you in a few slides the main parts of this. But why I did this? Because this, as I told you, these guidelines are addressed to the member states, are addressed to representatives, but of course these guidelines are addressed first of all to who? Also to the sports judges. To me, as a member of the FIFA Dispute Resolution Chamber, I have at 2 o'clock, I have an hearing with the colleagues of the Dispute Resolution Chamber. And I was extremely happy when FIFA gave us also even additional guidelines on how to consider some aspects. At the end, the decision is always with us, of course. But these guidelines can be also extremely useful to you, to the sports lawyers, or the policy makers. Let's see it together. The first agreements are the agreements, the so-called expiring agreements, or the new agreements already signed. But in that regard, the FIFA says that with regard to the first kind of agreements, an extension should be granted until the new end of the championship. Instead, if the championship was supposed to end on the 3rd of May, and there was an extension until the 3rd of August, the employment agreements, the relevant employment agreements, should be extended until the 3rd of August. So the same for the new agreements with new clubs, which have been already signed by the player Michele Colucci and Chelsea. Instead of starting on the 1st September or 1st of August as initially foreseen, will start with the commencement of the new date of the championship. Could be the 1st October, the 1st of November. In case of overlapping seasons and registration periods, watch out. FIFA still gives to the parties the possibility to agree on something. But if there is no agreement between the parties, FIFA says the priority should be to the former club, so that the former club will be put in the position to complete its own competition, so that the so-called integrity of sport can be safeguarded. Then we have the third category. I'm just reporting here the key elements of the guidelines, and then we will see how should we, as sports judges, and you as sports lawyers, take into account from a practical point of view. With regard to this kind of agreements that cannot be performed as the parties originally wanted, FIFA says the attention should go primarily to what? To national employment laws, insolvency laws, where they are, and to collective bargaining agreements. For FIFA, what is important, that the principle of equal treatment is safeguarded between players and leagues all over the world. And we will see how. Another guidance principle is the good faith principle in the negotiations. And then, of course, the proportionality and reasonability test. We need to see how proportionate, how reasonable is a unilateral variation of the remuneration of a player, from a club. And it's also quite interesting to see, alternatively, says FIFA, we can go for the suspension of the agreement as long as the championship is suspended. We cannot do it like that. Two conditions must be met. First of all, a proper insurance to the players. Second, it's recommendable that adequate alternative incomes to the players are given during the suspension of the measures of the championship. Now we start the part concerning the impact on us as sports judges, as sports lawyers. First of all, FIFA talks about unilateral variations of contracts. I'm sure you are all sports lawyers, you know the FIFA regulations, you realize that unilateral variations of contracts are not expressly covered, touched by the FIFA regulations of the status or transfer of players. But watch out. FIFA, the regulations, talk about unilateral terminations, which is different from a unilateral variation. There are two different concepts, but we can all agree that a unilateral variation of a contract can lead to the unilateral termination. I will give you some examples. For now, what is important for us to know is what is allowed, what is not. FIFA says that, indeed, the outbreak of coronavirus can be considered as a force majeure. And we have to take into account also the definition given by each legal system. We can call it a force majeure or clausa rebus sic stantibus, so meaning those conditions that render impossible in any case the fulfillment of the contractual obligations by the parties as they originally wanted to have. Let's try to apply this principle in practice to all the agreements, the three categories of agreements that we have seen in the guidelines. Expiring agreements and new agreements. I give already some figures. Up to date, 16 cases seems to have been lodged before the DRC and the Play Status Committee concerning COVID-19. Only 16 until now, but we will expect many more for the months to come. How we are going to assess it? But we are going to see what is the relevant law, what are the relevant federations regulations, or the contractual provisions coming from the collective bargaining agreements. If there is nothing there, of course, we are going to consider what is the contractual autonomy of the parties, what the parties have decided. This is the most interesting part, the part concerning the agreements that cannot be performed as the parties originally anticipated. A general question. Are unilateral variations of employment agreements allowed or not? Yes, of course. They are allowed. They are allowed if, first of all, there is a justification, a legal basis in the national system. This is the first thing that we are going to see. Then, once we have seen if there is or there is not a legal basis, especially if there is no legal basis, we are going to take a decision. You are going to give an advice to your clients following following this principle. First of all, you can have a case where a club decide to reduce the salary only to what we can call it the targeted players. Who are the targeted players? Normally, the foreigners, the superstars, the ones that are high paid, or all the employees. Only to them. Why? Because they have received a huge amount of salary. You are going to cut even 20, 30% of salary. The club is going to save a lot of money. But then what happened? We found out that the club used this measure only against that player, not towards all the squad. This is a clear discrimination. If there is a crisis, if the club has difficulties, economic difficulties, it has it with regard to all the players, all coaching staffs, all employees. Then, you are the lawyer advising your club or your player. You have to convince FIFA or eventually CAS or the national body where you refer to your cases, depending on the circumstances. You carry out, of course, the burden of proof. You have to demonstrate to the judges that that choice is justified according to the relevant law. How do you do that? First of all, if you bring your case before FIFA, make sure that you provide a legal translation of the relevant rules, being employment rules or federation rules, in one of the 4 languages of FIFA. Second, you can ask a legal advice from an independent lawyer or an independent academic, being aware that the counterparty will do the same. But put the judges in the best conditions to decide. It's your burden to do that. Then, FIFA says cases will be decided according to good faith. But how? You as a lawyer, me as a judge, I'm going to show the good faith of the parties. Did the party at least negotiate, try to negotiate in order to mitigate the impact of the measures? If yes, maybe there is some correspondence. Ask your clients to provide you with all the relevant correspondence to produce before the judges. Did the club have some meetings, or the federation have some meetings with the members? Provide minutes of the meetings. Maybe there are other pieces of evidence that you can provide, but this is what now I have in mind. Of course, then, in order to take a decision, like every judge do, if you want, you have to, we go through the so-called reasonably proportionality test. What do we take into account? We take into account several elements. The first ones linked to the good faith. The second one, also interesting, the economic situation of the club. Watch out, I told you that until now, only 16 cases are before FIFA concerning the COVID-19. But I already know that there are clubs around the world which are immediately prompting, you know, a case on the basis of termination for just cause. There is a pandemic. FIFA has said somewhere that I'm allowed, which is not true, to cut in the unilateral the salary. I'm going to terminate the contract. And then you find out that maybe that club was already insolvent vis-a-vis of the player. The club maybe did not pay the salary of December, January, February, and now says, okay, but now there is the pandemic, now I'm justified to terminate. No, this is not the reasoning that the judge, a sports judge, will do. In order to terminate a case linked to the COVID, first of all, a judge is going to analyze the validity or not of a unilateral variation of the contract. Very likely the remuneration. And we'll do it on the basis of the principle that I just told you. Valid or not valid, this unilateral variation. If it's valid or not valid, then there will be the second step. Is this unilateral variation only alone enough to trigger a unilateral termination? How I'm going to judge this? Not on the basis of the guidelines, but on the basis of the instrument that is already there, on the basis of Article 17 of the FIFA regulations on termination of contract. Two different steps. First, I'm going to analyze the unilateral variations of the contract, valid or not valid. Then I'm going to analyze whether there could be a justifiable termination or not. I'm going to do that on the basis of the FIFA provisions on status and transfer of players. Keep it in mind, please. And then I will, you see, analyze what is the proportionality of the amendments, of the cut of remuneration, what is also the net income of the player after these amendments, after these measures. And I'm going to see what I already mentioned before. Is this a measure that has been taken only against Michele Colucci or Ronnie or someone else? Or is a collective measure that has been implemented, let's say, not against, towards all the other players and of the club? We started on time and I want to finish on time. And of course, I'm there for all your questions. But what are some of the lessons that we can learn from all of this? First of all, we have seen that there are different approaches to the same problem. The problem has been the same for everybody. COVID. COVID has affected the life, our life, the life of clubs and players all over the world. Nevertheless, the measures taken to fight COVID have been slightly different, at least at sports level. Some federations, and I reported some example like the Dutch Federation, the Japanese Federation, the Portuguese Federation, already put, for instance, emergency fund for the players. Players Union Association also put in place some funds. Governments around the world have taken general measures against unemployment. Federations and governments have been working on what? On protocols. But watch out. These measures have been taken with regard to the employment and not necessarily with the commercial contracts. You can be sure that now, as a lawyers, we are going to put much more attention in the wording, in the conditions linked to a validity of a commercial agreement to safeguard sports and clubs, for instance. You can be sure that now, if you didn't do it in the past, you will put in the contract a specific clause on force majeure, especially if you come from a common law countries, because then you have to discuss about the frustration of the contract, and it's better to put it clearly in that context. I think that all federations should learn at worldwide level from the ones who were a step ahead. Provide, for instance, reserve funds. It doesn't matter the name. You can call it a reserve funds, emergency funds, solidarity funds. It doesn't matter the name. What doesn't matter is the substance. Make sure that there is some economic aid for clubs. And watch out. Not only to professional clubs or players. There are other clubs much more in need. There are the whole category of amateurs clubs who need a particular attention. And for this, I think I've been writing about that. I will always say that we really need to revise the funding system, the economic systems. We really need to give much more attention to the grassroots sports, to the lower level football. We need to change our culture. We need to rethink football. The sports model, watch out, the sports, let's say the football model, the way it is now, it does not work. Things can be improved. Sports must be improved. We can all agree that we need more solidarity, economic solidarity, between clubs, between federations at international and national level. We agree that governments could play a role also in this, in the sports in general. The schools, watch out. We as citizens, we as sports lawyers, we can play a role. We should come out, we try to come out with ideas, with solutions. And when we do not have creativity, maybe we can look at the best practice around the world. But we need to take this as the opportunity to shape the future of sports in general, and football in particular, together. Now, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Miguel. That was a fantastic presentation. There's two subjects that you have touched upon, but where I would like to hear a little bit more from Inge André Olsen, that is currently has experience from Denmark, and that is related to the recommencement of football and the impact on revenue. Because as you've written in your survey as well, there is a tight link between the ability to return to football and also the revenue streams, right? So I'll give the word to Inge.
Yes, hello. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, basically we would just like to have some of your, if you could elaborate a little bit about how the reopening has happened in Denmark.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
how the competition is organized and training and yeah.
So we started up in small groups with a distance of 2 meters between each player, you know, when they were on the pitch. So we couldn't use the locker rooms, we couldn't use the gym facilities. So it was quite different from the normal trainings, but it was better to start up with some exercises than not doing it. So in Denmark, we could train 8 players together. And then slowly and step by step, they opened up with 1 meter distance. And then I think it was 1.5 months ago where we could start with full contact training. And all this was according to strict protocols. And I think Denmark followed Germany quite close in terms of the protocols. So it was like 40, 50 pages with different rules we had to follow. And I think only the last 3 weeks we were able to use all the facilities like the gym facilities, the locker rooms, and also that we could provide food for the full squad after trainings, and also that they could take a shower after the training. In terms of matches, it was very difficult. Of course, it was a big organization without any people inside the stadium. But step by step, we see that it's improving. And the last 2 weeks, we had some test pilots, 3 matches here in Denmark, where we opened up to have around 1,500 to 2,000 people inside the stadium. But what we see is that the organization of those matches is bearing a lot of costs. So in terms of the tickets you can sell, you cannot get the income covering the security and all these other things you have to organize inside the stadium.
Yeah, so the clubs, they have to cover the costs of the extra measures that has to be taken to have audience.
Yes, this was the only way to slowly and step by step open up the football again. And we also have this test procedure during every week. We are testing like all the players and all the staff around the team. So we divide it into on pitch and off pitch, and all the on pitch workers should be tested at least 1 time a week. So we have like a mobile test system driving around in Denmark, visiting all the clubs and do all these tests. And this is also a cost that we as a club have to cover. So approximately for the Danish Super League and the Danish First Division, this is a cost of, let's see, around 1 million euros for the 2 months.
Right. Yesterday when we spoke in Norway, there has been some debate about the subject of using temporary layoffs of players and the effect that has on the employment contract. And you mentioned it's been done slightly different in Denmark. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, it was a different solution here in Denmark where we could send all the employees, also the players, home, you know, but they couldn't do any work, so we couldn't instruct them to do any training. But then we could also apply for some funding from the government. As a business, you could receive around, I think, 2,500, 2,600 euros per month per player or employee. So I think this was a better solution than what we saw in Norway with layoffs, because we had no discussions here in Denmark if the players could terminate their contract or not.
And this was applied to all players in a squad, right? And then the club sought compensation.
Yeah. All players, and you could also decide if you sent them home for 3 days, 1 week, or 2 weeks. So this was also a difference between each club.
Do you have some input or questions, Eric?
Yeah, I just want to follow up. When we invited Inge to the panel, we thought it would be of interest since Denmark was one of the first leagues to recommence, to hear some thoughts about the practical issues. And how does the adherence to the protocols directly inflict on the training and the capabilities to do proper training?
The current situation is okay. So when we are on pitch, then it's full contact and like normal. But of course, outside the pitch, we still have to keep this distance between all the players and the staff. And also in terms of traveling, it's quite difficult. So we decided every time we go to the Copenhagen area to charter a plane. So it's a huge cost for the club, but we are not allowed yet to use public transportation like planes or train. But we hope that step by step to show the government that as a professional football club we can handle all these matters about the virus and the safety of our employers, that we can be back in beginning of September when the new season starts to a more normal situation. But we also had this occasion yesterday when we played the cup final, where they allowed 1,500 people inside the stadium, where we saw that some of our fans couldn't exactly do the things that was in the protocol, you know. So it was a huge gathering of people, you know, with not 1 meter distance. And I guess this also will have impact on how the government in Denmark will see for the reopening of full capacity in the stadiums.
How was that handled yesterday, Inge?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we could already outside the stadium see that this would be quite crazy when all the fans came inside the stadium, because when we were driving in with the bus to the stadium, it was like fireworks and smoke everywhere, so you could hardly see the stadium. Still, we were only 100 meters away. And so I think it's always difficult to tell after it happens how we should proceed. But this should be stopped outside the stadium and not let the people come inside the stadium, you know, because this started from the warm-up, that it was 200-300 people together, you know, and they didn't obey any orders to keep this distance with 1 meter, and this just continued during when the match started, you know, and then they started to announce on the speakers that remember the COVID-19, remember the protocols, remember to keep the distance between each other of you, but it was too late, you know. The good thing was that our fans, when we stopped the match, I think it was stopped for 15 minutes, that when we sent some of the people from the staff over to the fans, then they listened and they left the stadium. So this was the best thing that happens, if you can put it this way.
Could you also address some of the, if any, economical aspects of the experience with the COVID-19 in your club and in Denmark? Has there been, we heard there were some costs adhering to the protocols, cost of testing. Have there been other economical implications, loss of income from spectators, sponsors?
For us as a club, more or less all the incomes from the matches is from season tickets and sponsors, and of course the sponsors can ask refund for the matches they didn't get in this season, and but we see that less than 1.5% is asking to get back some money from this, but this will also be covered by the government if we lose money according to the season tickets and the sponsorship. We cannot see yet that any of our sponsors are pulling out or don't want to pay the agreed fee for this season, but we don't know yet. This could maybe be something that we see the next 3 to 6 months, when also you see the effect on the rest of the society and the businesses around us. But for the moment, we don't have major losses due to the corona. I guess this is a different situation in the bigger clubs, you know, like FC Copenhagen, Brøndby, where they have more tickets sales on the match day than we have.
Looking at the future, you as a sports director are now going into a reopening of the transfer window. How do you look at the transfer market and restrictions on tryouts and traveling restrictions entering into the opening of the window?
Yeah, so first of all, for all of us, it's a totally different situation. We don't know what will happen the next months, and the international window will close latest 5th of October. So we have some time to do the activities that we need to do. But in terms of money in the market, it's a big question mark. So you see a lot of clubs. The needs in the squads are there, but the money, we don't know yet if they are there for a lot of clubs. So it's a difficult situation, and I don't think we have the answer how this will affect on the transfer market before we comes into the next season and next year. We are looking mostly in the, if you can call it, the local market, not only Denmark, but Scandinavia and the western part of Europe. For players, it's more difficult to sign players now from South America, Asia, Africa, whatever, due to the traveling restrictions. So I think this also will have an effect on which players are moving now the next months.
Have you experienced any challenges with the contracts ending or like 36?
Yeah, so more or less all contracts ends in end of June according to the season end. So here in Denmark, it was a mutual agreement between the players and the clubs that we have to offer and give the players 1 month prolonging of the contract. So the league in Denmark will end 26th of July on the same conditions that they had in the contract expiring in June. So I think this was a good and reasonable solution between the clubs and the players, that we couldn't do a difference if it was a good player or a poor player. So it works out fine. The only thing we couldn't control was the players on loan from foreign clubs, you know. Then you had to go into individual negotiations in each case.
Thank you. And looking already at the next season, how do you see this is going to be some challenges for the next season?
It's in Denmark. You will, I guess, have the tightest schedule in Europe, because before the Covid-19, the new season should start around 15th of July. Now we are discussing if we should start up last weekend in August, or if we should wait until after the international matches in beginning of September. Okay, so this will affect on us that we have 10 match dates that we can't play on, and those 10 match dates need to be placed somewhere, and we all know that the European Championship will take place in the middle end of May with the preparation period for the players. So we have serious problems to reach to play all the matches we need to do in the next season. And I guess we can schedule the matches, but if any matches are postponed, then we are in serious trouble.
Okay, thank you, Inge. Any other questions to Inge before we proceed, Ronnie?
Yeah, before I proceed to Espen, that will speak a little bit from about how things are in Norway. Yesterday we touched upon what happens in Denmark according to the protocol if a squad is infected or members of the squad. What happens to the match fixture or the schedule?
Yeah, so in Denmark we have the roster of the 25 players. We can say it's the A list, and we also have a B list where we can add like 20-25 players, young players. So the message we got across the table from the league was, okay, we will not postpone any matches. So if you have 10 players infected from the A list, you have to play players from the B list. So we cannot postpone anymore, and we need to fulfill the obligations we have to the TV, to the sponsors, and so on.
So if you are unlucky, you may have to field the junior team, or
if we are really unlucky, I need to play.
okay. You're probably still good, but yeah. I know just one last question to Michele before I give the word to Espen. Based on the reports that you have received, do you have any reports with examples of after the reopening of football, the infection numbers increasing, or do you have any empirical?
No, listen, we did not ask these specific questions to our colleagues around the world now, but this is going to be asked in the new version, of course, because if you think about all the championships that have restarted, they have only restarted a few weeks ago. But what is interesting, of course, to note is that anyway, there will be everywhere at least the attempt to put in place some protocols. First targeted to the clubs of first categories, but then also to the others, and even to amateur clubs. I noticed, for instance, that even for the amateur clubs, in Italy, the federation and the league, the amateur leagues, has adopted very strict conditions for the clubs to recommence the football. I found that the discussion here, the presentation of the colleagues, also of course the questions by the colleague, very, very interesting, because everybody is talking about the protocols, and indeed we all need protocols. A protocol for me is a framework to work in. Someone has to tell me what I'm allowed to do, how I'm allowed to do, and then I have to comply. Then every club, every player has every club has to make an effort in order to comply. But these are, of course, costs that should be supported also with the aid of the federations, of the governments, that everybody should take. So for sure we are going to take this into account in the next survey, because it will be also the case that some clubs, I do not refer to the professional clubs, I refer to the millions of clubs, amateur clubs, that maybe are not in the conditions to fulfill the requirements given by a certain protocol.
Yeah, because I sent you the open letter of the Norwegian or the president of the Norwegian Football Federation, and one of the issues raised there is that unless amateur sports is also opened, then you will have a lack of protocol. What is your, or players will start to play football independently, but outside the organized football. What are your thoughts on that?
I thought that letter, it was really very well written, because pointed out a major problem. It's better to have someone in charge of this with the protocol in order to try to control the situation. Watch out, we are making a difference between professionals, amateurs, but actually we should talk about make a difference between professionals, amateurs, and recreational sports. My kids play in the streets, football in the streets. They are not playing within in the context of on a pitch with a professional club or an amateur, but they also need to know what they are allowed to do or not. The control can be from the parents, can be from the city hall, but someone need to have a framework, a given framework. Only if I have a framework, I know what I can do and what I cannot do, independent from the fact that this framework works, the measure works or works not. But for sure, we need someone in charge of all this situation.
Thank you. Espen, would you like to share some thoughts?
Sorry, I have a question for all of you, actually. For the colleague now in Denmark, but also for the colleague from Norway. In light of your experience, you just touched it before, but I'm not very curious of this. On the basis of the feedback that I'm receiving from several colleagues around the world, I have the impression, which is more than an impression, that clubs are investing or are spending the same amount of money that they were spending last year when there was no crisis due to COVID. You know, you see what I mean? We know that there are clubs in economic difficulties, and still, we know that there are clubs investing, spending a lot of money in transfer of players. I'm not saying that this is wrong or this is right, but this looks like a paradox. From one side, we try to negotiate salary cuts, and on the other side, I'm not generalizing, on the other side, it seems that clubs are investing the same amount of money, even more, compared to last year. There is something that I do not understand here, or maybe understand. And this is why I think that we should change things. What is your opinion on that? To all of you.
Who wants to go first?
I can comment on that. I think that is a very good point, Michaela, and I think my impression from the Norwegian league, at least, is that I think the clubs handled the crisis very differently. Some clubs temporarily suspended player contracts, while other clubs had sort of better financial structure and were able to keep all the players at work. I think that for those clubs who manage to keep the players in work, I think they should be free to invest in new players as well. But I think it would look very bad if a club would temporarily suspend a player or trying to amend a player contract, and then a few weeks later they invest in a new player, paying a transfer fee and paying wages. But my impression is that those clubs who managed to keep the players in work, they were the same clubs that also managed to sign new players a few weeks later.
The colleagues.
Well, Michela, what we have seen from the media here in Norway, I won't go into details, but there is an impression clubs having put all their players on a leave to save money, but they're not willing to sell any players. They're not willing to sell. They don't have the money to pay the salaries, but they're not willing to play. So that's in comparison to your paradox, it might be a question for the coming transfer market.
Yeah, so they have a regular contract. They are not willing to selling, but they just put them on leave.
Yeah,
Yes.
they save salary costs and then.
So they put them on leave. They don't pay the salary.
There's a government support system that covers, for some players, all the salary, for some players, not all of the salary. But at the same time as that was done to costs, at least from the information in the media, it also offers were rejected in the same situation. And
So,
some of them that have gotten their economic strength through doing that are now in position to shop in the next window.
So Inge speaking. Michel, what we see in the market today from our side is that you did some transfers, you know, a year ago, half a year ago, where you agreed on a transfer contract and some installments, and now you are up playing with all the terms you agreed like early on to renegotiate the different installments, payment dates, and so on. So I think clubs, if it's true or not true that they have difficulties due to the COVID-19, they are using the situation to get better terms in the already done transfers. This I can see here in the club that we have 2 cases now that we are working with, and it's significant amount of money that we should got paid, yeah, during these days. But I think we will agree with the 2 clubs that we can divide it up in, instead of 2 installments, 3 installments, and we also will push the payments until next year, you know.
And this is good. At least you try, you know, to have payment to abide to fulfill your economic conditions. You are showing good faith. You want to pay, and you divide the remaining part of the money to be given in installments. This is good. What is not good, for instance, is that, sorry, I have a lot of friends in the Arabic countries, but what happens in several, almost all of them, Arabic countries, immediately, you know, when the pandemic, watch out, not when the pandemic break out, when the FIFA guidelines were published, poof, by reading it superficially, they said, oh, okay, now I'm allowed to cut the salary of 70% because of this. No, it does not work like that. You see, when in the beginning we were talking about good faith and bad faith, also in the negotiating the employment conditions with the club. But, you know, now I'm very curious to see what is going to, now it's still too early. Another thing that I wanted to draw your attention. It's nothing new. It is published on the newspapers. There was an important transfer of a player between Juventus and Barcelona for, I don't know, 80 million. But some of these transfers are made to, you know, to be in order with the balance sheets of the clubs. I need to spend so much money. I need to receive so much money. We made this kind of transfer. But at the end, the money, the material money which is effectively exchanged is not so much. It's not so much. And then you read, this is also in the public domain, the figures given by FIFA. You have some examples where the money given to the commission for agents, it's much more than the money effectively given for a transfer. There is something that it doesn't work here. There's something that it doesn't work. We need to do something. We need to do something, absolutely. Otherwise, the football is going to survive, but just survive. It's not going to for the better.
Espen, do you have something more to?
Yeah, I was thinking I was going to give just a short summary of what the process has been here in Norway, and also sort of leading up to some of the issues that Michael has addressed in his presentation. But just give a short summary first of the Norwegian situation. Well, the Norwegian football season is of course played from spring to autumn, and it's due to start the first week in April. About 3 weeks earlier, around 4th of March, the Norwegian government implemented what they call the most radical measures since the Second World War in an attempt to control the coronavirus. These measures, of course, heavily affected football, as all football matches and organized football trainings in Norway were suspended. And in the first phase, following the suspension of football activities, there was a clear tendency that clubs feared the financial consequences. And this fear was understandable, as many clubs' income sources were likely to be affected. Probably the largest income source is the broadcasting rights, as Mikael mentioned. And in the beginning, it was unclear if the season could be played at all, or at least to be played in full. And the revenue, of course, from broadcasting rights was likely to be reduced if the number of matches was reduced. Secondly, there was unclear what will happen to the ticketing revenue. Even if the season was to be played, it was likely that there would be strong restrictions with regards to the number of spectators and consequently the ticketing revenue. And finally, as Ingrid mentioned, there's uncertainty regarding the sponsorship agreements. There was a fear that sponsorship deals might be affected, as the sponsors were likely to reduce their spending budgets due to their own financial challenges. This in turn is likely to impact the ability of clubs to sign new sponsorship deals. So all these financial challenges forced a number of football clubs to take actions in order to reduce their salary costs, including salary costs of players, as we briefly mentioned. More specifically, a number of clubs unilaterally decided to temporarily suspend player contracts, which is allowed according to Norwegian labor law. And from a legal point of view, I think that the club's unilateral decision to amend the contracts is very interesting. As Michaela mentioned, in April, FIFA issued guidelines that addressed the legal consequences of COVID-19. And in these guidelines, FIFA suggests that unilateral decisions that vary terms and conditions of contracts can be recognized if they are in accordance with national law, or if they are permissible within collective bargaining agreements. Now, I've read quite a few decisions from the DRC and from CAS, and it is my clear impression that in these cases, where there is a conflict between football regulations and national regulations, then the football regulations will normally prevail. So, Michaela, in your view, how do you think that DRC or CAS would consider a dispute where a club has unilaterally decided to temporarily suspend a player's contract, which is probably in accordance with national law, but in violation of RSDP?
Espen, thank you so much for the question. I think this specific question, actually, these unilateral variations due to the COVID are in accordance to the national law, I understand, But watch out, they are not, this is my opinion, they are not against the FIFA regulations. The FIFA regulations now have been slightly amended for some parts with regard to the transfer windows due to the COVID. And then you have, anyway, these guiding principles on the implementation on the effect on the contract. But you see, I mentioned in one of my slides, and it is one clearly mentioned also in the general, in the guidelines of FIFA. FIFA says that you have to proceed with the analysis through following steps. See if there is a national law. Then you are going to see if there's been a good faith, equal treatment, no discrimination, and so on. Or, says FIFA, alternatively, you can have a suspension of the employment agreements if this is allowed by the national law. FIFA accepts such a suspension. FIFA says in the guidelines, says we can accept this provided that two conditions are met, that these measures are applied to everybody, and that there are adequate measures, adequate income for the players. And this is what I understand, maybe not. In Norway, I think that, if I correctly understood, there are anyway some measures that have been taken, I don't know, from the government or from the federation themselves. The ultimate goal is to protect, anyway, watch out, both players and clubs. Nobody here is against the clubs, nobody is against players or anyone else. No, this must be a common, a shared effort to solve a problem in good faith, trying to pick up all possible measures. This is why it's important to have a concertation. We are all on the same ship. We need to do something all together. And you know what, Espen? I firmly believe that we can do it. We can do it. We have to do it. Without waiting, watch out, without waiting a federation, international, national federation, a league to take a measure. I repeat my concept. Each of us can come up with ideas, can try to share this idea. And I will send you what is our next survey, our next project is a manifesto. You know what is the name of this manifesto? Shaping the future of sport together. We will put it online and we will send it to everybody, to policymakers, to students, to professors, to coaches, to athletes. We will collect the feedback from everybody. Because what I'm interested to know is what can I do as individual, as a sports lawyer for sport. I can dedicate my time to my kids when they go to sport. I can dedicate some pro bono activities as a lawyer to clubs and players. I can come up with some ideas. You know, students sometimes, many times, come up with some questions and some ideas that at the beginning are bizarre. And I say, you know what? And why not? Why not? Why nobody thought about that? Let's give the word to everybody in order to solve together the problems that we are doing. And let's do it with enthusiasm. Let's do it with passion. Let's do it for the good of the game, for what we like to. We never forget, I say to everybody, I said also yesterday to another conference with other colleagues, we are privileged. We are privileged because we work as a coaches, as athletes, as a sports lawyers in a wonderful world, which is the sports, the football world. the game that we like. And we have to do something for that.
I just have one follow-up question to the elaboration about the use of temporary layoffs, Michele, because you mentioned the test of good faith.
Mm-hmm.
And if we presume that the facts are that the club is due to COVID-19 and in an economical position to make use of temporary layoffs, or at least that's the basis that is alleged. But at the same time, they are refusing offers on players in the squad that could generate income to pay agreed player salary. How would that be assessed under the test of good faith that you?
You know, the good faith, more than a test, is a principle, of course.
Mm-hmm.
It's a principle. And Ronnie, I'm going to answer like a lawyer. You need to reason on a case-by-case basis. You need to see all the evidence. What are the real facts the real facts and the reasonings that the clubs are able to put forward to a judge. Also, the affected players. I mean, it should be a balance. First of all, it should be a balance of interest. For sure, it should be a balance of interest. You should see also the good faith. You see it at the moment that the player approaches the club. Say, okay, you put some layoff in place, some layoff measures, but I have these possibilities which could be also good for the club. Then you have to strike the balance. Then you have to see. But you cannot have a general. I cannot provide you with a specific answer on this. Really, this is the difficulty part for a sports lawyer and for the sports judge to collect all the elements, put the judge in the best place to decide. It's not easy.
No, of course, there's several layers to answer that question on several criterions, of course. Thank you. Espen, do you have something more?
You know what is nice? Yesterday I was having the same kind of conference call, webinar with Italian colleagues. At certain moment, everybody was shouting. Here, it's so peaceful. It's so nice. It's really a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, it's a slight difference in cultures, I guess.
No, but I like it. I love it.
Yeah. Anyone else has any questions they would like to pose to anyone in the panel, or have we covered? Are people hungry for lunch?
I just want to follow up on Michele's experience with the solidarity, because my experience is in negotiations with the international clubs, players. My experience is everybody is meeting the negotiations in good faith with a huge amount of solidarity, trying to find the solutions, looking and respecting everybody's needs. So I think most of the cases we've been handling here, we have reached good solutions. Everybody taking all needs into account, and of course respecting the needs to set new dates in loan agreements, set new dates for buyout options, but also respecting the uncertainty, especially here in Norway, not knowing when the Norwegian transfer window opens. So I think we have managed to find good solution. Seeing a lot of solidarity and trying to cope with the situation from a legal point of view. And of course, understanding that some clubs want to postpone payment, have another term of payment. But I think so far, everybody has been able to show good faith and good faith negotiations, bringing this hopefully through this situation we are in.
Very good. Everybody has been reasonable.
Exactly.
But Erik, this is very interesting because to showing good faith in renegotiations of already agreed terms. Okay, so on one hand, you give your counterpart the opportunity to pay maybe less or have more installments over time, and then on the next side, the transfer window is opening and they invest heavily with money in new players. So then you are at the ethics side of this business.
It will be interesting to see whether clubs having used the layoff system, not paying their player, how aggressive they're going to be in the next transfer window. But of course, so far, a lot of my experience has been well, especially setting new dates and respecting that the leagues are suspended and reopening and we're going to restart. I think mostly people have been able to find and respect some good solution on that one.
Yeah. Just to wrap this up, Michele, when you have touched upon it, but you wrote wrote that you would like a discussion with us on shaping the future of sports together, and you've said quite a bit about it. But could you say or summarize some of the specific takeouts that you've had from the survey and your experience on what recommendations you can give in order to make football sustainable? What measures are sort of best practice in your view? What is necessary moving ahead from this situation?
Yeah. Solidarity is the key word, but we really need to believe in this word. We really need to put this word in practice, because I hear too much only talking about solidarity. But at the end, I don't see so much really solidaire towards everybody. Professional clubs, especially the most important ones, can for sure give much more attention to other less important clubs. Governments at the national and local level could provide sports clubs, schools with sports facilities. I don't know what is the situation in Norway. For me, as Italian, you have always been one of the most advanced countries from a social point of view. I've never been in your beautiful country. I know that it's beautiful. They told me that it's beautiful, but you know, I'm quite sure that it's different from other countries, at least from a social, cultural, sports point of view. I've been in Copenhagen, in Denmark, 25 years ago. I was already impressed by the sports facilities, the attention that was given to the kids, to the schools and everybody. So, you know, federation can do something by providing more money, more facilities to the lower categories of clubs, much more attention to the clubs. How do we do that? In Italy, there are some compensation which is given for the training of the players to the clubs who effectively train the clubs. Then you are going to see, I'm pretty sure that you have the same system in Norway, because I want to believe that at least in Europe, the federations have some training compensation at the national level. But then you are going to go to look at the figures. And then you realize that 1%, 0.50% of the entire transfer of a player is dedicated to the training or to the solidarity of clubs. This is only smoke in the eyes. This is not going to work. What is 1% out of 1 million? Why don't you give 5%? Someone can argue, but it's already something. Yes, it's already something, but it's not enough. Yesterday we had this conversation. There was my friend Ornella Bellia, the co-editor of this book that I invite you to read, and Omar Ongaro, and I suggested, listen, now that there is a reform still going on with regard to the intermediaries who want to be again in the FIFA system, licensing. But do you think that it is an utopia, a dream, to have, for instance, a solidarity compensation that each intermediary should pay at the occasion of a transfer? When I read that there's been, watch out, yesterday, it's news of yesterday, a transfer of a player of 10 million and a commission, and then maybe it has been, to be verified, 1 million euros. Then you could start thinking, but why not some of that money also goes in a fund for the lower categories? So governments with facilities, federation with the funds, clubs at a local level. I think the clubs could do even much more for the community, together with the schools. Let's send their players to the schools, dedicate sometimes to the pupils of those schools. This will have a beneficial effects because they are their supporters. And the clubs will become even closer to the youth, to the young people. The athletes, the individual athletes can play a role in this, of course. You have generous athletes, but which give money, and some others that give more time. Each of them can do this. And I give you, in the survey, you will find several of these examples.
Thanks a lot. I've received a couple of questions to Inge, Espen, and Mikkel from Joachim Maltin from the Players Union. And he will join FIFPro soon, I believe. And he asks, how do you foresee the opening of the European qualifying games already in August?
The Norwegian national team will play its first match, I believe, 4th of September in the Nations League. I think, first of all, I think that both UEFA and FIFA have been very clear that they want to prioritize club football. I know they moved the Champions League and the Europa League, and they moved the national team matches as well. In order to complete the club competitions, but now we will slowly start the national team competitions as well. This at least in September from Norway's point of view. I think it will be very, very exciting to see. It will definitely be restrictions regarding traveling, restrictions regarding the number of spectators. I think that at some points you will have to restart the national team competitions as well, and hopefully by September we will be in a better position to arrange those matches than we are today.
Anyone else that wants to contribute to that question? Or? Then there's a question, I believe, to Inge. Players in Denmark and several other countries have been tested for COVID-19, unlike here in Norway. How often are you still testing players? Could you share your experience with this practice? Is it helpful? Is it worth the extra cost or not?
It's a good question. So we are testing once a week, but we are not only testing the players, we are also testing the staff and all the other personnel that are around the team. So we also need to test people in the media department. I'm getting tested once a week, the CEO in the club. So we are testing around 45 to 50 people each week. So last week we saw that it was one club here in Denmark that had 2 players infected. So of course, what you can see is that we can pick up the few that are infected, so they are not in the group playing with contact and possible can spread this infection to other players. But of course, it's a significant cost for the clubs. So I'm not sure if it's worth it. Could we do this without testing like in Norway? I guess so. And we also paid a lot of attention to the protocols that are made in Norway by the Norwegian top football and the Norwegian Federation. And we also, for our players, used part of this protocol regarding the quarantine rules for the players. This is not something that we have in Denmark, so it's only the test system, and that we try to keep the players aware of the risk going around in the society with family, with friends. But we also try to put in force this quarantine part of the protocol of what Norway made.
Anyone else have something to add to that or follow up?
Yeah, is I'm able to speak now, Ronny? You hear me?
Yeah, you are. I brought you in.
Yeah, thanks. It's Joachim here from the Norwegian Players Union. I raised those questions, so thanks for replying. To Inge, I understand that you're still testing the same way as you've been doing from the beginning. Is it planned how long you're going to continue? And then the
Yes.
other follow-up, yeah, you can answer that first.
Yeah, as far as we know, it will continue until the end of the season, but we don't have any clear answer what we will do when we start the new season.
Okay, thanks. And then to Espen, you answered referring to the national team, but if I'm right, I think also the clubs will start qualifying for the European Cups. I'm not sure if the dates, but isn't that quite soon as well? And can anyone respond on your thoughts on that one?
That's true. That is probably before the national team competitions. At least the qualifying matches for the Europa League and the Champions League will start sometime, I think, in August. I'm not quite sure of the date, but sometime in August. And that will raise the same issues as the national team matches. You know, we'll have to have strong infection control regarding travel and the number of spectators. So it will be the same challenges that the clubs will face in the international club competitions as the national teams will face in the national teams competitions.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see. It seems to be too soon, but okay, let's see. But thanks for replying.
Okay, thanks everyone. Anyone has something more to share, or should we head for lunch? Thanks a lot, Michele, for taking time. I know you're very busy.
Sorry, if I can, thank you so much, because I realized that I'm the only foreigner, and you were so kind. I really appreciate that, to speak in English for me, for the occasion of this seminar that actually was organized by Norwegian lawyers, the Norwegian Association Federation, and I really appreciate that. And please stay tuned. Help me in shaping the future of sport together. I really need the help of everybody. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you very much, Michele.
Bye. Ciao. Ciao.